They were ordered to end their expatriation and return to America, where Colonel Lindbergh was to take up the cause of America first. Speeches were provided, written in English, announcing the British, Roosevelt, and the Jews on supporting America's neutrality in the European War. Detailed instructions specified where and when speeches were to be delivered, even the type of apparel to be donned for each public appearance. Every political stratagem originating in Berlin, Lindbergh enacted with the same meticulous perfectionism that distinguished his aeronautical pursuits, right down to the night that he arrived in aviator attire at the Republican convention and accepted the nomination for the presidency with words written for the occasion by Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. The Nazis plotted every maneuver of the election campaign that followed, and once Lindbergh had defeated FDR, it was Hitler himself who took charge, proceeding to prepare, in weekly meetings with Göring, his designated successor and director of the German economy, and Heinrich Himmler, overlord of Germany's internal affairs and chief of the Gestapo, the police agency charged with Charles A. Lindbergh Jr.'s custody. A foreign policy for the United States that would best serve Germany's wartime objectives and his grand imperial design. Soon Himmler began to interfere directly in U.S. domestic affairs by bringing pressure on President Lindbergh, humorously belittled in the Gestapo chief's memos as our American Gauleiter, to institute repressive measures against 4.5 million American Jews. And it was here, according to Mrs. Lindbergh, that the president undertook, if only passively at the start, to assert his resistance. To begin with, he ordered the establishment of the Office of American Absorption, in his judgment, an agency inconsequential enough to leave the Jews essentially unharmed, while seemingly meeting with token programs like Just Folks and Homestead 42, Himmler's directive. To inaugurate in America a systematic process of marginalization that will lead, in the foreseeable future, to the confiscation of all Jewish wealth and the total disappearance of the Jewish population, their appurtenances, and their property. Heinrich Himmler was hardly one to be misled by such a transparent deception, or to bother to disguise his disappointment when Lindbergh dared to justify himself through von Ribbentrop, whom Himmler dispatched to Washington supposedly on a ceremonial state visit to assist the president in formulating more stringent anti-Jewish measures, by explaining to the supreme commandant of Hitler's concentration camps that guarantees embedded in the U.S. Constitution, combined with long-standing American democratic traditions, made it impossible for a final solution to the Jewish problem to be executed in America as rapidly or efficiently as on a continent where there was a 1,000-year history of anti-Semitism deeply rooted in the common people and where Nazi rule was absolute. During the state dinner given in von Ribbentrop's honor, the president was taken aside by his esteemed guest and handed a cablegram, decoded moments earlier at the German embassy, that constituted in its entirety Himmler's reply. "Think of the child," the cablegram read, "before you respond with such poppycock. Think of brave young Charles, an outstanding German military cadet who already at the age of 12 knows better than his celebrated father the value assigned by our Führer to constitutional guarantees and democratic traditions, especially where the rights of parasites are concerned." The dressing down by Himmler of the lone eagle with the chicken heart, as Lindbergh was described in Himmler's internal memo, marked the beginning of Lindbergh's repudiation as a minion useful to the Third Reich. By defeating Roosevelt and the anti-Nazi interventionists in Roosevelt's party, he had provided the German army with additional time to quell the continuing and unexpected resistance from the Soviet Union without Germany's running the risk of having simultaneously to confront the industrial and military might of the United States. Even more important, Lindbergh's presidency furnished Germany in industry and the German scientific establishment, already secretly developing a bomb of unparalleled explosive force powered by atomic fusion, as well as a rocket engine capable of conveying this weapon across the Atlantic, with a further 2 years in which to complete preparations for the apocalyptic struggle with the United States, whose outcome, as envisioned by Hitler, would determine the course of Western civilization and the progress of humankind for the next millennium. Had Hitler found in Lindbergh the visionary Jew-hater the German high command had been led to expect from intelligence reports, rather than what Himmler contemptuously dubbed a dinner party anti-Semite, perhaps the president would have been permitted to complete his term of office and serve a second 4 years before retiring and ceding the government to Henry Ford, whom Hitler had already settled on as Lindbergh's successor, despite Ford's advanced age. Had Himmler been able to rely on an American president of unimpeachable American credentials to implement the final solution to America's Jewish problem, it would, of course, have been preferable to the employment at a later date of German resources and personnel to fulfill that mission in North America, and Lindbergh's plane would not have had to disappear from the skies as was deemed necessary by Berlin on Wednesday, October 7th, 1942, nor would acting President Wheeler have assumed power the following evening, and, to the astonished delight of those who considered him till then nothing more than a buffoon, proved himself a genuine leader in a matter of days by spontaneously implementing the very measures that von Ribbentrop had proposed to Lindbergh, and that, as Himmler believed, the American hero had failed to carry out because of the puerile moral objections of his wife. Within an hour of Lindbergh's disappearance, Mrs. Lindbergh had been informed by the German embassy that responsibility for her child's well-being was now hers alone, and that, should she do anything other than vacate the White House and withdraw in silence from public life, Charles Jr. would be removed from his military academy and dispatched to the Russian front for the November offensive on Stalingrad and remain on duty there as the Third Reich's youngest combat infantryman until he valiantly expired on the field of battle for the greater glory of the German people. And we will pause there.